We'll be all set. So again, welcome to Intro to Residential Gardening. This really is coming out of the fact that we can't be out there for fair season, and where we would be meeting people out, you know, in the fairs, out at events and all that kind of thing, where we just talk to you and kind of get a sense of what you're trying to do with your property and what we can do to help. And so we thought we'd take it to a webinar and just have this opportunity to go through our gardens and show off what we do and really what we do with our free time. So I'll just move through the slide here. So my name is Kari Quaas. I'm the Community Engagement Project Manager with Snohomish Conservation District. Been with the district about 3 years. I'm one of those easy, low-hanging fruit that I was already doing sort of the things that I do now, but now I just have more tools in my toolbox. And then I help on the outreach team. And then with me today is Sara Rocero, who's also on the outreach and communications team. And she kind of came up through our vet crew and was working in our office as a restoration coordinator. So we sort of have the two sides of our toolbox, in that I'm more urban and she's more, I guess, residential, rural, if you want to say, for habitat stuff. So hopefully today, as we go through the presentation, we can talk to different aspects of our work and our knowledge base. Like, she's the bird lady, I can talk about growing tomatoes. So hopefully between the two, we'll be able to cover everything that you need to know. So today, everyone who has joined in with us, your lines are muted. We'll be the ones that can talk. So when you need, and we can't see you, so don't worry about that either. To interact with us, please use the Q&A or the chat if you have anything technical that comes up or you just want to say hi. You can talk to the other attendees as well. But question and answer, we're going to try and go through. So if something comes to mind, just please ask the question and we will answer it, or we'll cover it at the end. So just a quick brief about the conservation districts. They were federally mandated back in the Dust Bowl era. So literally it was about protecting the topsoil. That was kind of the goal. So it started with farmers, and it sort of at that point extended into rural, residential, now urban, where many of us live. And so we try and protect natural resources is our main thing. There's 45 across the state of Washington. We are with the Snohomish Conservation District, so our district happens to cover Snohomish County, but also Camano Island. And I think it's just because it's mainly linked by land, although they're island county. So all these many districts. But in short, we work with landowners. We're non-regulatory. We're just here to help. And we fill in gaps where a city couldn't do it or a nonprofit can't do it, and end up being a go-between. So please check out, if you don't live in Snohomish County, which one might be your conservation district. As for Snohomish Conservation District, there are about 25 of us on staff. Our office is in Lake Stevens, so we're kind of central in the county. Many of us are working from home right now due to COVID, so hence the webinar, and hence we're not out at fairs and such. But typically we would be out there talking to you. We do site visits. All of that's free of charge, because really we're just here again to help. So by all means, check out our website. We're on social media. We provide a lot of information and education to folks. So today, Sara and I have been developing this webinar. We're going to cover a lot of topics, but in short, we're using our staff as the examples. So we have photos from many of our teammates, and we're going to cover lawn lettuce, native plants, edibles, backyard habitat, wildlife, and all kinds of other things. So again, if at any point, feel free to ask a question and stop us, and we will jump in. We did want to thank our teammates who did send us photos, because everyone does something a little bit differently, which is quite cool. From drought tolerant gardening to growing a lot of food in their garden, or native plants, or supporting birds and wildlife and pollinators. So there's a lot of interesting things. And we also have people that just have apartments, so they have balcony type gardening as well. So we cover the gamut. So what is lawns to lettuce? Lawns to lettuce came out of the idea that really lawn is not great for many things. Yes, it's wonderful for soccer. Yes, it's wonderful for running through the sprinkler. But as a food source, it's kind of what we would consider a monocrop. It doesn't have a lot of diversity, there's nothing to really eat there. It also takes a lot of resources between watering, maybe fertilizer, time, mowing your grass. I know people that like to mow grass, but I'm not one of those people. So this program was developed with, hey, there's maybe a little bit more you can do with your lawn. And you don't even have to get rid of all of it. I mean, you can do whatever you like. It's your property or wherever you live. But adding in some elements of diversity and changing it up can actually be really cool. So be sure to check out our website on that. So really what we're talking about is taking this, okay, grass, yeah, big soccer game, but other than that, big flat area, and turning it into this. So this is one of our former teammates this is even at a rental property, I believe. Is that right, Sara? Yeah. So he had, it looks like chicken coop and beans and flowers and all kinds of stuff, just way more interesting and a good place for the dog to roam too. So like, here's another example. This is over by 522. You can see the bus in the background. But again, just taking grass and now through sheet mulching and raised beds, and even I think these are those kind of plastic protectors things, you can grow beans, you can grow tomatoes, you can grow all kinds of stuff. This was a project in Monroe, tied into Housing Hope, one of their individual houses. And again, just a regular front lawn. And we put in raised beds. You can see the rain barrel in this picture too. And now they can grow squash and zucchini and eat the tomatoes, and just way more interesting. So this is another one of our teammates, Catherine. She's up on Camano Island. And in this case, I think this is when she bought it. I know she's online, so she could confirm in the chat, but it looks like it was just a lawn. And then on the right, look at all the diversity in the flowers and the happy pollinators that are there. So that way there's food for the habitat and animals and critters and bugs and all of that around. Plus it's just pretty. Here are some other gardening pictures. Look at all those onions. Oh my goodness, squash, borage in the background. You can see here. There's a lot of plants that, as a conservation district, we're not going to tell you what to grow. There's certainly native plants to our area, but at the same time, it's great to grow food, and it's great to have a variety of things going on. So pick what you like. Here it looks like we have some beets and onions and scallions and parsley and just a variety of wonderful food. Lettuces are very easy to grow. Corn, squash again. And in this case, I want to pass this off to Sara because she's going to talk about Kari's property, because she's in a different position where she lives in a more rural area and has a bit more land than the rest.
Yeah, Kari is on our sustainable agriculture team, and one of the things she's also really interested in is creating a food forest, and she's trying to establish some throughout Snohomish County as well, but she's also doing it on her own property, and she has some chickens, and I believe she still has some ducks, but pictured here is some ginkgo, some pawpaw. She really is a huge advocate of using chickens as pest control as well. It keeps a lot of her plants healthy, and just reducing grass as well, because they love eating grass and just digging in the dirt. So it's just another element that one can do when establishing food on their property, and especially when establishing a food forest. Another one of Kari's property, I believe she has more ginkgo in here, and some other really unique trees that will be able to provide food and attract insects too for her chickens that are free to roam parts of her property. And as you can see, she does have to cage in some things so they don't get pecked by the chickens, but really incorporating different elements and having different structural elements as well can really help diversify your food forest.
And this one, here's another coworker of ours, Holly. She lives in a larger property as well. So she's able on hers to have a whole bunch of elements going on from kind of a forested area. She does have kind of a little soccer field area, but look at this garden. So again, squashes, crocosmias, that's her grandbaby. And then here, I think hollyhocks, again, they don't have to be native plants to make it helpful for food for insects and bugs and stuff. And then her beans and broccoli and kale. Kale's easy to grow. Kale can grow in the wintertime really easily here. Oh yeah, and native plants. But why do we want native plants, Sarah?
So native plants are really just matched to our climate here in Washington, very acclimated to our soils, and they've really formed these beneficial relationships with wildlife and other plants as well, like fungi, really used. But I think one of the greatest things that we need to kind of harp on with native plants is that wildlife is greatly dependent upon native plants for food, for cover, for other resources, and most importantly, places to raise their young. So we want to keep diversifying our landscape. We're not saying that ornamentals are bad, but we really do want to create and establish more native plant growth for insects and wildlife, birds, because as we're seeing with climate change and everything else, they're going to need more resources, and it's going to be more of a struggle for wildlife continuing to live in the habitats they have for a very long time, and seeing those habitats change, seeing landscape changes from something that was a forest or now a grassland that's being turned into homes. And so if we have native plants at our homes, that is kind of helping decrease all of those factors that can really decline populations of local wildlife and amphibians as well. So just have a couple examples up here of the pretty flowers. They're labeled. We didn't put Latin names on there, so we didn't want to make it too technical, but if you have any specific questions about plants, we'd be happy to answer those as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love native plants. And I want to say, oh, also this photo too, this is Kari's property, but Sarah's the hiker of our bunch. They go out in the wilderness. And so this is maybe what more people think about when they think of native plants. Is that right, Sarah?
I would think so. You think it's, you know, in a forest, it's the understory, it's really some of those shrubby areas. The picture to the left, there's an old stump, which will be great for huckleberry, and I believe Kari does have huckleberry growing out of that stump. Also, it's surrounded by salal, and salal has delicious berries, and a lot of our berries can also be used as dyes, which is really spectacular. The top picture to the right is a vine maple, a young one, and then below we have some wild ginger, which is a great ground cover, especially if you have a moist area with some parched shade. And then if you're lucky enough to see a flower of wild ginger, they're just beautiful and soft and little pink, and they also hide behind or underneath the leaves. And so you kind of have to be more observant when trying to find those flowers as well.
Super cool. Ah, my house. Okay, so my house is in North Everett, and the quick short version of it is my parents bought in '64, and I live here now through a series of events. But it was rented for a long time, and for the most part, when you have a rental, a lot of the tenant is responsible for the nurturing of the garden, but most will just maintain. So in this case, it was very simple, just grass and then some established plants that had been there forever. And when I moved back in, many of the established plants in this picture, which is I think from the county, had way overgrown. I mean, like way overgrown. So this looks very tame, but that's not how it looked when we came back. But then as we started to go to the native plant cell, which the district does, we found native plants that we liked, and we just started changing things up. And so now today, part of how we got there, just a step back, is sheet mulching. And sheet mulching is lasagna gardening. You hear that terminology. Basically, all of the shipping that you're getting right now, just use those boxes. If you want to kill grass, or just basically make it so it's easier to work with, so you can dig it up if you want, or just If you don't want to do that, lay down the cardboard, put dirt over it, and you're ready to have a garden bed. That's what we've did. And I think it started, if people live in my neighborhood, they would remember there was a tarped area. It looked terrible, but now it looks beautiful. So because we basically just kept moving items along through the bed to make where we wanted the pathway to be, where we wanted the beds to be, and then added plants that we liked over time. So like Sara was just saying, we really have gotten on that native plant bandwagon. And I think we're rewarded with lots of critters, lots of birds and habitat and just everything that really makes it interesting. So the Pacific rhodie that you see in the photograph, that's been there easily 50 plus years. And I remember when I did not know much about pruning, I cut it way back and it still has returned. And now it's as tall as our second story. But in the middle of this photograph, and I'm hoping you can see my mouse, there's a whole bunch of native plants. Twinberry, this is a mock orange, and then we have 2 flowering currants, and there's another twinberry. One thing to keep in mind when you put in native plants is think about your space. If you have a lot of room, it's easier to have native plants. So maybe those shrubs and the bigger plants. In this case, we can have them here, but I need to keep paying attention to them and pruning them down because otherwise they would take over everything. But native plants aren't all shrubs and trees. They also come as ground cover. And so, you know, like in this photograph too, in the top, that's a Western bleeding heart. And they're lovely. They can spread too. They can be probably about 2 feet high, and they have that little familiar heart-shaped flower. But there's other native plants that are just really low to the ground. So depending on your space, you can change that up. And who doesn't love mock orange? Once you've smelled a mock orange, you're good to go because it's just a lovely, fragrant citrus smell. So we have 3 cats. They love the garden too. It provides lots of places for them to hide and hang out in the shade. Have a plane flying overhead, sorry about that. But columbine, this one is another native plant, really great for the bees, spreads really easily, is beautiful. This is one I got this year, which is a sea thrift. You kind of find it in maybe drier places, or it's good for rock walls, and it's just that cute little purple flower, but we saw bees on it too. So each year when I look at the plant sale guide, I'm always just flipping through going, what would fit in my space by size, and you know, is it drought tolerant, does it need sun, does it need shade, and paying attention to those things because it matters into how the plant will thrive or not thrive on your property. We also have a lot of edibles, and I offer extras to people as they walk down the street. In this picture, hopefully you can see there's a little spider in there. These are our coastal strawberries. That also is a native plant, and it's spread very much through our garden, but it's very easy to just walk over and grab a berry. We also have snap peas, and I put multiple asterisks on blackberry because we do have it, but let me just say it's a beast, and we'll cover challenges of gardening in a little bit. But other edibles, yeah, basil. I mean, what do you eat? Depending on your culture, depending on your heritage, depending on what you just like to cook, grow things that are meaningful to you. So that way it is enjoyable for you to have it, and then you actually eat it instead of just letting it go. So rhubarb, we love rhubarb crisp, right? Who doesn't? That's so tasty. So it also grows really well here. So make things that are easy for you, but things that you enjoy, because then you'll actually eat from your garden. Pollinators, we also have a ton of pollinators. So in this picture, this is just a berry here at the top and a little native bee that is enjoying the flowers. Borage has been very successful for us, which is technically an edible as well. Those purple flowers you can eat. You might see them on salads. This yellow flower down here at the bottom, this is a sedum. Those two are very popular. They're native as well, and so bees love those. This is one of those ground nesting bees. Our neighbor has a space behind his house where it's just, there's nothing there. There's no dirt, grass. It's just dirt, I should say, no grass. And you see all these little holes, and it's these individual bees that have buried themselves in the ground, and that's where they live. So they're not going to bother you. They just need a place to hang out. So the habitat. And in this bottom right picture is a great golden sand digger wasp. And I had to look it up because it was so big and people thought it was the really bad hornet that's out there. It's not. This is a native wasp as well, and they're a pollinator. So they're on our alliums and they're jumping around, and it just makes it really fun. But also I wanted to just come back to plant things that make you happy. You don't have to have natives. You don't have to have things you want to eat. It may be something you just want to look at. So we have lilies and crocosmia. Crocosmia is great for hummingbirds. I mean, fantastic. Our cats, again, like to hang out. You can see our cat, which is by the evergreen huckleberry. We have roses in bag. That bush has been there forever. This is a Polita witch-tailed, this yellow one that's out by the street. And then this plant in the bottom right corner is called an Edgeworthia. It is a wintering, flowering plant. In the summer, it's just full of green leaves, but it smells really good in January when you need that boost. So make sure to change your garden up with things that you enjoy, things that'll provide some color at the time of the year. Polita witch hazel is a winter plant, flowering plant too. So that way it's not just dead sticks or have that appearance, because our native plants definitely die back, but then they return. So just here's some quick pictures of how it's looked over the period of time. This tank that we have here is full of asparagus. And asparagus, when we first moved back in, and if those of people that know North Everett, there have been mills all around the outside. So there was always that, what's going on with the soil, we're not sure. So those first couple years we were growing in the ground, we were growing more plants that we could just look at as opposed to eat. Now we've added mulch and compost, and we've changed up the soil, so we're not concerned about things like that anymore. And once we finish the front, then we move to the back. So this is our backyard, and now we have raised beds just made of pallets. You can get free pallets from pretty much any place that delivers something. Just ask for them. You just cut them in half and you screw them together, and there's your bed. Very easy. Also, make note of this lovely tank. We'll come back to that later too. So just pretty. I enjoy it. The people on the street enjoy it. And this did not happen overnight. I want to again say this is a multi-year process, little bits at a time. It means I still have to prune. I still have to weed my garden. We plant new things. You have to do stuff, but it's fun stuff to do. Okay, so back to the general program. So the Lonza lettuce program, and then plant a row. So I can take my extra rhubarb to the food bank. And many people don't know that the food banks take live or fresh produce. They want it, actually. Nobody wants to just eat canned food all the time. So if you have extra, we do this program called Plant a Row. You can sign up. And if you're just getting started with gardening, we are definitely here to help. That we provide seed packets for people who sign up, or Joe Crumbly on our team will come out and do a site visit. If you have a community garden space you're working on, then we're happy to help with that too. Just to get you going, there's a cost share program. Cost share is basically funding. We will put up to $500 towards your community garden. So if like the Bayside Pea Patch comes to mind right now because they were asking some questions, but there's ways that you can get support you need from us. So
yeah, and adding into that, Master Gardeners with Washington State University Extension are also another great resource in terms of getting help with pests, being able to really ID things, and other resources as well. So if you're interested in that, WSU Master Gardeners, also a really great resource and one of our partners that we do a lot of work with.
absolutely, yes, thanks for that. I attended their Slutkin and Snails class earlier this year. It's just perfect. Very helpful. They're everywhere. So part of the Plant to Row program too, this is one of our community gardening sites that have a group we're working with. But the sign down there, that was created by local youth. There's about 10 different designs. And so if you donate, I think it's 50 pounds of food, you can get a sign for your garden. So talk to Joe about that, and you can learn more on our website. And now I want to turn it back over to Sara to talk about composting.
Yeah, so you can compost a lot of yard debris, food, and many folks choose to use their compost back into their garden or other places around their yard as well. To the left, we have a food digester that one of our coworkers has on their property, and it looks like it's just strictly food. Whereas to the right, that is my compost at my house. I've had this compost for about 6 years, and I have never taken anything out of it. I'm more of the lazy composter. I don't mix it as often as I should. I sometimes add water just to make sure all that aerobic activity is happening and things are breaking down. But it's really up to you if you want to use that brown, dirt, gold soil, if you will. And it's just another thing that, you know, we're not putting food into a landfill. And so it's going back in the soil. I'm sure I have just the richest soil underneath that compost. And Kari has her yard waste bin here too. So moving into, just talk briefly about drought tolerant landscapes. One of our coworkers, Ashley, has this lovely rock garden. It's really beneficial in a few ways. It's beneficial if area doesn't receive a lot of water, and so you can do drought tolerant species like sea thrift and other ones, and if you're interested in those, we can provide a little resource list for you. But also what's great about some of these rocks is it really helps deter some weeds from coming in and colonizing the area. And Ashley stated that she was going to be in the process of adding a few more plants, and I'm sure she'll have an order from our native plant sale coming up. Oh man, I don't know about everyone else, but I have done a lot of work around my house since COVID-19 really popped into our lives and is currently still with us today, unfortunately. I hope all of you had those opportunities as well. I just kind of wanted to demonstrate an example of some of the growth that happens. I got some plants in April from our plant sale and planted them in an area where there was grass and have been doing a bunch of steps of removing lawn. I don't know if you can see my mouse, most likely not. Back towards, you can kind of see some landscaping rocks back towards the right of the picture. And then just really moving in a bunch of other different logs and different elements. But it kind of just goes to show how many plants you can have in an area, and then the type of growth that will happen between the beginning of the growing season until what we're in August now. So it's just been a short amount of time.
And then Sarah, up front here in this right picture, are these black cap raspberry?
It is. We got some black cap raspberry. We have lots of red flowering currant, ocean spray, mock orange, Indian plum, red osier dogwood. And I got some berries from the black cap raspberry this year, and that was the first time I've ever had a black cap berry.
Oh, how was it?
Yeah. But this took a little bit of time. You know, we removed the grass on that side and kind of just flipped it over and kept the grass there and really built up the area and put some logs against it. And it just has been really beneficial. And in one of the future pictures, you'll see a pileated woodpecker on the log.
Oh, nice.
This is one of our coworkers, Elisa. This was a rental property that she had in King County. And just like us, she loves native plants, and her partner decided, you know, this is a rental property. We're going to be living here for a while, and we really want to enjoy our backyard space, not only for providing habitat, but aesthetically too. And so you can kind of see the difference. I think this was just maybe a year apart with being able to really establish some beautiful things. It looked like she might have some thimbleberry. She loves lupin, so she always has lupin on her property. But just simple things you can do. And if your landlord allows you to really do this kind of renovation and landscape, obviously checking with them first. But they were able to get a lot more joy out of this space by just putting a few plants in and putting in just a little extra work and a little more TLC than it had before.
Yeah, and it looks great. I'm sure they enjoyed it more when they were living there too. So, and sometimes the landlord might give you money for a plant budget, you know, or take it off your rent or something. I know I work with my tenant on things like that too. So,
Right.
looks great. Let's see. Oh, this is back to you, Sarah.
Yeah, this is my yard again. And I think a lot of us go through the hit and miss. What do we want to do? We establish something first and we change our minds, and you can see I have all these logs around here, and then it just looked too crowded, so we put the logs somewhere else and just kind of did this wood branchy looking fence. Something we're going to have to add more to because our dogs get into it, and have created a little path throughout the pollinator garden. My partner and I really chose to not use cardboard when when mulching. So we did remove a portion of the grass, and I would have to say it depends on your own physical capabilities, because it can be a lot of hard work. And if you have access to somewhere to dump the soil in the grass, or if you have a truck that you can be able to load it and then take it somewhere else, like Pacific topsoil or something, and then dump it out. Otherwise, keeping grass in place and just really smothering it with like a lot of newspaper, and then about 4 to 6 inches of wood mulch. And we can talk about the difference in a little bit of why using wood chips versus bark is more beneficial, but definitely a lot of time. And so Elisa, she is currently running our plant sale, and we will get to the little secret about the plant sale, a little reveal later. But she was going to be moving, and she got all of these wonderful native plants that she wanted to establish on her property. So instead of planting them, she potted them all. And as you can see here, just all of the pots of some deer fern, you got some coneflower, lots of woody shrubs, and just needing to give them a little bit more water and TLC before they're actually installed into the ground.
So Sarah, before we jump in, I have one that some questions that might be kind of timely to this too. So what if you have a cleared area with stumps, roots, and other brush debris? Can we set up raised beds without tearing everything out?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's pretty I think the answer is just more specific to the level, like how level is the area. Are you going to have a barrier between the soil and a barrier between like having the plant bed, and a barrier between like the soil and everything else? I would say if it's pretty flat and the area is cleared and it looks, I would maybe just give it some time to see what comes up so you can pull out. Otherwise, I think just having that raised bed with soil will really just smother everything else out. But if you would also like to email us a picture, I might be able to give you a more specific answer, and something that will not lead you down the wrong road.
And then here's a follow-up question. So yes to barriers, but the land is somewhat sloped, not steep. And yes, they can send pics. Thanks.
That would be really helpful. I don't want to misspeak and get you to do something that maybe won't work for you long term.
I don't think we have a photo of it, Sarah, but I would say that another thing that people can do if they have down trees, if they have a little bit of space, is called hugel culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's on our website too. But essentially what happens is that you lay out the branches and or the stumps, and then you pile it with other mulching leaves and then dirt. So it's mound gardening is what hugel culture means. But what happens over time is that the trees break down, and then they provide that heat and that action that can help things grow. So I've seen squashes grown on hugel culture that are insane. So that might be something else you could do with your down stumps. Once you've taken down the trees, then you can still use them. Like everything can be used for some purpose. So yeah, thanks for the question, and please feel free to ask more.
Yeah.
All right, there you go. Oh, wildlife.
Wildlife. So with as establishing plants, especially native plants, you're going to see a lot more wildlife. So I'll just briefly go through from top right to like bottom or left to right. So at the top left, we have some salamander larvae. It's hard to tell if it's like a northwestern salamander or a long-toed salamander. In the middle top, we have that pileated woodpecker I was speaking about earlier on the logs that we have in our yard. And then I have on the top right, we have a long-toed salamander, and it looks like it's eating a little worm. And this came up on my front patio during a really wet night, and I just love seeing little sallies. Amphibians and birds, I mean, maybe just call me a naturalist, but I like everything. And then down at the bottom left, we have a California quail. And I've never seen a California quail on my property before. And you can kind of see the little pollinator garden that we just had going, and put some homemade plant protectors because I have dogs and they don't respect boundaries. But we put so many seeds in this area, and this California quail was just coming in and eating all of the seeds. And I knew that would be a risk of just putting seeds out, you know, scruffing it up a little bit and just having some mulch with it. A lot of birds got a lot of the seeds, but as you saw from earlier pictures, plants still came up, and it's still a very full garden. And then we have a northern red-legged frog, and then at the bottom right, we have a hairy woodpecker that was in my tree. And this kind of goes with different elements and structures of your vegetation, and then some smaller elements as well. Like, are you going to leave stumps, leaving just logs out to rot, which birds love and insects love and amphibians love. So there's just a lot of different elements that you can create, and we can talk more about some of the human-made elements that we can add to our properties as well.
And when I think of Sarah, when she first started, there was always a photo of her holding a newt or a salamander, or some piece, some critter from the field. I also wanted to say we got a comment that someone cut down 5 trees along the road and have let the summer show them how the plants emerge afterwards. And so they're glad they took the time before they planted something immediately before putting something in. So that's
a great point. Yeah, there's always seed banks in the soil. So when you clear something, others are either going to just be able to grow again that weren't able to grow before for different environmental conditions. And then some will be colonized or brought by birds, poop, and other things. But it's always great to kind of just look at the area, see what's going to happen, maybe give it a little bit more time, and just plan on the way.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was, not all of us can have really tall trees, but I really wanted to demonstrate the importance of layered vegetation and being able to offer like vertical variability and, diverse structures that different animals can use. So we have a list of birds on the left, and there will be some more bird examples, but definitely just trying to create habitat. And, not all birds will be seen on the ground. And it's just really important to have diversity in your mind when creating habitat and having various structural elements. And bees, the bees with the coneflowers and the pearly everlasting. So about 70% of our native bees are ground nesting, and being able just to provide them different resources, different shaped flowers, different color of flowers, and just a lot of variability when it comes to pollinators, because we need them and we rely on them for many different food sources. And I couldn't help but to put the little Pacific horse frog in there as well. So some of these human-made elements, doing things like just leaving a little bit of bare ground. As you can see in the bottom left, this is a nesting native bee, and it's creating a little burrow in the ground where it will lay some eggs. There's bat boxes you can do, And I think Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has some great ideas for bat boxes and which direction to face them, how high to face them. And then we have some swallow boxes, insect hotels, and I just had to put in these little eggs from a white-crowned sparrow that nested in a tree on my property. So just being able to have different structures, and some birds will nest on the ground, some are going to want something that's like 4 to 6 feet off the ground. And so being repetitive, which is that layered and really structurally, vertically diverse elements in the property really help wildlife. Challenges, man, I don't know about you, I always run into blackberry. Had some nightshade trying to creep into my property, but size, gardening space, you're going to have to be really eliminating things that are unwanted or just not needed to be there, and really discerning if you have rain barrels or not, establishment of plants and how long you have to water. Native versus ornamental is going to be different, whereas once native plants are established, you don't really have to water them anymore. They're going to be kind of good to go, and as we say in the restoration world, free to grow.
I love it. Small gardening spaces. Yeah. So what if you only have a balcony, or you live in an apartment and you need maybe talk to your HOA or whoever about a gardening or multiple gardening space or a shared gardening space. We were really happy because the picture of the little bird here, this came from one of our coworkers, Lily, who just has a feeder out on her balcony. And look, she got a little, I think it's a chickadee. Is that right, Sarah?
Black cap chickadee.
Black cap chickadee, good, I'm learning. But I mean, you can provide habitat in any size or shape. And so, you know, working together with other people, but I certainly, when I had an apartment, I grew tomatoes out on my deck because I wanted to have tomatoes. So there's plenty of things you can do, herb gardens too. Okay, so I'm going to pass this to Sarah because this is our coworker Denise's balcony, right?
Yeah, Denise lives in an apartment, and she's always really had a passion for plants and everything else. And working at our native plant sale, she was able to grab a few things, but also really establish some food that she's growing right on her balcony. You can see some of the lattice in the background, and I believe that's because she has a cat and she allows her cat to be on the balcony. And some bird feeders, and she's always sending me like, I got this new bird on my balcony, and she's just always so enthusiastic. And I just really love the example, because not everyone has the privilege of either owning their own home, being able to live in a detached structure, and you know, just being able to work with little spaces and doing what you can, and having more greenery around you can just make your life more pleasant and make you a healthier individual as well.
For sure. But then we wanted to talk about dear sweet English ivy.
There are some very escaped plants that have really just been established in certain neighborhoods and certain areas, and they will just take over everything. So this is an example of English ivy removal. Elisa, again, she moved into her new home. So all those potted plants you saw earlier, she will be planting in the fall, winter, when it's the appropriate time to be planting. And I'll just step into that now. The best time to be planting anything is going to be from October to April. And that really helps because the plant is dormant, it's not actively growing, it's going to require less water upon initial planting, and then once that plant is established, it will just be good to go. But as you can see, there's just a huge dramatic difference. And what she chose to do with that English ivy is to just dry it out. It's in a huge pile in her yard, and as soon as it's dried out and she's giving it a little bit of time, she's going to put that in her yard waste container. Some folks choose to bag certain things up that are not recommended to go into your yard waste container. That would probably be more of like the very noxious weeds. But definitely check in just to make sure what can go in your yard waste container. Don't want to have any more invasives out there than need be.
And I just will also say that I too have English ivy, which I'm actively trying to remove it. We're actually going to be taking down this fence, but part of it is that many of these plants have such deep roots and they're rhizomes, so they spread like you would not believe. So in this case, I think it makes for a nice green fence, right? But realistically speaking, on the backside of that fence, it gets grown through, and then you have plants that will wrap around. You see ivy on a lot of forested lands where they're kind of at the base of the tree and it grows up. Eventually that can kill the tree. So you'll see it removed on projects. I also wanted to point out the big leaf maple. This is on the bluff. Big leaf maples are massive, wonderful trees that take a lot of water. So that way it would help protect the slope. They also provide a ton of habitat for birds and critters and things. I will never take it down. I don't care if it blocks the view, because for me, it's a part of the view. So that I think is really important to think about when you have spaces where you can grow a big tree. They have a huge impact on climate change as well, pulling stuff from the air. So there's a lot of good benefits to having big trees around. This is my other challenge. This is behind the fence. And it hurts. I do more swearing behind the fence, I'll admit, because blackberry is a painful thing. It's very tasty, right? As I mentioned. However, realistically speaking, Himalayan blackberry is not native to here. It came out of, maybe it was California. It spread because it is edible. And it's very easy to grow, but easy to grow means it's easy to spread and push out other plants. So I was gonna put, and I forgot, but a picture of me holding up a root from one of these, and they look like a spider or an octopus, that they spread so far that you have to really get all of it to get the plant out. This particular year, based on timing, I have just sort of let it go, but every year I try and push it further back. But now I'll admit that I have blackberries in my freezer and I use them in smoothies. So there's this balancing act. We're not going to tell you they're bad, but we're also not gonna say they're good. You know what I mean? So
it's one of those noxious weeds we'll never get rid of. They'll always be here. But some really great elements to try to reduce the amount of blackberry. You can choose to dig out the roots, which is physically, it's hard. Or you can just keep slashing the green. That root ball that Kari was talking about is really like the powerhouse. That's where all that energy is stored. And in order to deplete that energy, you need to cut off its money maker, its food maker, which are the leaves, to photosynthesize and send more energy down into those roots. So really just like slashing, and really depleting all that energy, or digging it up and being able to compost it on your property and making sure it's covered underneath, or you could get more roots that will dig down, and it's just like, even if there's like a tiny stalk left, that can just turn into another Himalayan blackberry plant. So it's definitely just a hard plant to get rid of. And it also doesn't love shade. So if you can try to shade it out too, it's another great tactic.
And I guess we should mention, as you mentioned, shade, there's a lot of ways that you can do all of this work without using pesticides or chemicals, through manual labor, which does take time. I'm constantly pulling weeds. We don't put anything that we wouldn't want to eat on our property, especially with animals. And we have a neighbor who has grandkids coming by. We don't want those poisons out there. So we try and do everything very naturally. But another one that I'm constantly pulling is buttercup, creeping buttercup. The photo here, I'm holding in my hand what it looks like before it opens up to that little yellow flower. And when I was a kid, it was always, you'd hold it under your chin to get the glow. Do you like butter? But these things are terrible because in that bottom right picture, because it spreads, and it too is a rhizome. So it can wrap its way around things and take out plants that you don't want it to. So just think of that. also the nice trifecta here of bindweed. Once I learned that, morning glory is the nice friendly name, but why is bindweed or morning glory bad, Sarah?
It's like English ivy. It just takes over an area, creates some monoculture, and it just doesn't allow anything else to grow. It's just it's it's really bad. And unfortunately, you can still buy it in some areas as well. So please, if you're ever disposing of any plants, don't just throw them out into the yard. Like, dry it out and just maybe just throw morning glory in the trash. I don't know. We don't want it in yard waste.
I have a question. Yeah, bindweed seems to wrap themselves around other plants and choke them out. It totally does. Yeah.
Yeah, and you would see that with English ivy too. I'm sure most of us have been driving around and we see a big tall tree and we see all this ivy wrapped around the tree. That's going to kill the tree eventually. It's going to suffocate it. A lot of that ivy, like some of the roots and vines can get so thick. And so one of the ways to do that is to just really chop the roots in a circle around the tree from the bottom. If you can pull them off, that's great. If you can't pull them off, not a big deal, but really creating that ring around the tree and just cutting off its supply, because it's still getting its supply from the soil down below. So if you create that tree ring, it's a great way to potentially try to save that tree.
That's awesome. Ah, yes. Green stormwater infrastructure. You may hear that phrase. Conservation people use it all the time. Really what we're talking about is rain catchment. And the idea that rain falls from the sky, and we all know rain, that's fine. But once rain hits the earth, be it a forested land or your garden or pavement, it has different consequences. So in a forest, all of that absorbs into the nature and the earth, and it all gets used later. In our garden, it's the same thing. It's watering our plants, so that way you don't have to pull out the sprinkler for a day. But when it hits pavement, it picks up all the material on the ground, because that could be dirt or tire debris or oil or windshield washer fluid, all kinds of things, and then goes down the drain. And the storm drains that doesn't go to a filtering plant, that just goes out to the sea. So we don't want bad things, even fertilizers, things like that in your garden can be washed away. So rain barrels and cisterns and ways that you can keep the water in something is really good, and then use it when you want to. So I'm seeing a question about how to deal with a soggy backyard. Well, I had a soggy backyard, so I can answer this. But we have 2 rain barrels on our property, and if you remember, I said, remember that big white thing? I'll talk about that in a second. But the rain barrel off the garage really helps keep that back part of our property, which is sloped down a little bit, from being just a soggy mess in the wintertime. So it's 55 gallons, like this blue one you see on the screen. And that 55 gallons isn't just spilling out every time we have a big rainstorm, right? I have another one that's closer to next to the house, and it too, if left to the water to its own devices, would run straight down to the basement, and we would have water down there. We don't want water down there. So the barrels keep it from being soggy, keep it from being wet. And then, there's obviously big storms where we cannot control how much water is falling, and I'll say the rain barrel's full. And that's where you have an overflow. And I think you can see it on the right side of this picture, where there's a little piping that comes out. That extra can also be put into a soaker hose. It can be put into a regular garden hose. So, I lived in Seattle a long time ago. Water was really expensive. So it's nice to have a rain barrel, so that way you can have a water source that you didn't pay for. It's just falling from the sky. And I want to make it abundantly clear that it's okay to have a rain barrel or cisterns and collect water on your property, as long as it's used on your property. That's the second half of the rule. So making sure you have a structure that you can, the water falls on, and then you're reusing it on your property. Pooling yeah. So if you have pooling somewhere else on your property, it might be worth having us come out to take a look at it, just to see what is going on. It could be the rain garden might be a possibility too, or a structure in that space that can be connected to a rain barrel.
Yeah, there could be a couple things going on. I would say if there's already standing and just soggy water, that means it's not infiltrating your soil. So you might want to look and see like if the soil is really clayey. If it's an area where you can plant plants, a lot of those plants will help take up some of that water and have it be less soggy as well.
Totally. I don't know if Cameron's still watching, but this is Cameron. He used to work for us. He works for City of Linwood now. We do sell rain barrels. However, because of COVID and the phases that we're in, we're not doing any public sales at this point, but we hope to have them back soon because it would be ideal for the people that have a soggy garden or you have concern about water. They're nice to capture that extra. And then on a dry day, use that water so it empties some of the rain barrel down so it can be filled up again in another rain. So watch our website, we'll be selling them again. And then Sarah, these are some other examples from projects of how rain barrels are being used, right?
Yeah, so you see this gravel here in the picture to the right, and that's kind of just like for some of the overflow. My partner was able to pipe down the overflow and really put it out towards kind of towards the fence, so it's going into that native planting area. But as we're looking at wood chips, I just want to harp on how beneficial wood chips are for your property. So if you have any plants, please don't use beauty bark. It's going to just really decompose a lot faster than wood chips will, and it doesn't really provide any additional nutrients or benefits to your garden. It's just more aesthetic. Wood chips on their hands might not be as aesthetically pleasing, but it's going to do a couple things. It's going to slowly release nutrients to your soil and to your plants, and it's also going to help retain some of that water and really not have your soil dry out as fast. Another thing that wood chips do is really inhibit the growth of other weeds. Not saying you're going to be completely weed free, and depending on the size of your wood chips, chunkier the better. It's going to really help deter and maybe not get as much sunlight as it gets down into the little wood chip area to really just have more weeds on your property. So it's a great thing to just less weeds, less water, more water in your soil, which you may or may not, depending how much water there is to begin with, and then just more nutrients for plants and soil as well.
So we did have a question that just came in from Carol. Do we have a good referral list for arborist wood chips? Like to coordinate a delivery instead of having it just show up. And I know the just show up because I've used that one. Chip drop is free and it's amazing. And we are still working through the amount of chips that were dropped off at our home. But it also is on their timetable. So the way that it works and why it's free is that it's their extras. So they're trying to get rid of it. So it really is nice because it's a recycling process. We use them as well as the arborist gets rid of those things. But do we have a list somewhere, Sarah? I'm trying to think.
We don't, and it gets tricky for us being a part of a conservation district to really refer specific businesses and companies. But in my personal experience, I was driving by near my house and saw Davy, the arborist company, chipping lots of big leaf maple and other things that were growing next to some telephone poles and some wires. And I told my partner, and he was just like, hey, they're a good company. I'm just going to call them up and see if I can get that load. And he called them up and they came and they dropped. So I would just say maybe call places that you see chipping up trees near your house, or just call Davy and see if they're able to bring stuff by or when they'll be doing some work in your area. I just know that worked out for me, and maybe it might work for others.
Yeah, I know in Everett, there's a couple different companies that are out on Smith Island. And so I would just Google chip drop or chips or something like that and see what happens. But yeah, there are ways to get them free and there's ways to pay for them. But I think what Sarah was just reminding her is beauty bark is not great. So remembering to take live trees that can be chipped is better for the environment.
And another word for these wood chips is animal-friendly hog fuel. And that's something we use a lot in rain gardens, which we'll talk about in a slide or so.
Yes. Okay, so that white, coming back to the white thing in my picture of my backyard again, and again, the beds, and you can see our residual pile of chips. But this tank is 550 gallons, and it's our intent to bury it underneath in the back of our house, so it'll, again, take water off of the roof. And then we'll have a downspout front, or a spigot from it that will then funnel into the backyard. So ideally, we won't have to be using the sprinkler anymore to water the plants in the back. It'll be kind of a drip, kind of drain downhill sort of scenario. But we get a lot of water here. There's like that superstorm that was last September. There's a lot of rain that can fall from the sky in a very short amount of time. So having a way to capture it is really important. So if you are in a position where maybe you do have a larger surface that you're trying to pull from, we can help with cisterns as well. So reach out to us for that. On the rain garden. So again, like I said, I tried to do a rain garden through a city program, and that we ended up not doing it because of our location, proximity to the bluff, because of how water flows. It's going to go downhill. So, but they're very useful in many properties to be a part of the stormwater system. And again, you're taking the water off the roof of your house. It flows into the garden, which has a very specific soil, bioretention soil. So it holds the water, it filters it just like a natural forest would. Remember how rain falls, but then once it hits the ground, it's a different thing. In this case, a rain garden acts more like that forest. So it filters it back into the groundwater table, which is good. The way that this is designed, and part of the mapping around it, is you have plants that really like wet, soggy soil, and you have plants that like dry. So you can plant differently based on the height and where it's located in a rain garden. And WSU Master Gardeners, again, is excellent with that in terms of determining which plants can go where. There's a whole handbook, the Rain Garden Handbook. Google that, you'll find it. There's a lot of great resources that way. But many cities will have programs where there's a rebate program tied to this, because it does help with stormwater, and it does help with pollutants making it into the water system. So anything that I should add on that? I think we have an example from Derek's garden, right?
Yeah, Derek is one of our engineers, and one of his specialties has really been pushing rain gardens. And he can be credited for getting a veterans conservation crew to the district and supplying many veterans with jobs that are able to land them positions elsewhere. But a couple things I want to touch on the rain garden. So first, we use a special soil mix. It's not just any soil. We're using bioretention soil. So what this is, it's a sand compost mix. The sand allows water to really easily infiltrate, and then the compost is really using think of it as a magnetic for pollutants. So it really binds pollutants together, and in some cases, if an area is really polluted, you're going to have to exchange that mix. You're going to have to take it out and put in other mixes. But that's not in every situation, and mostly not for residential rain gardens as well. These are more like large scale industrial, but something to just be mindful of. And then we have the animal friendly hog fuel. So we use the animal friendly hog fuels because it's like long, thin pieces of wood chips, and they're not the little ones that are chunky and short and little. And we use this for rain gardens because it really helps bind, sorry, my hands are below the camera, but like really binds the wood pieces together. So when there is water flowing into the rain garden, it's just not going to be completely washed away.
That's great. And they look cool. I mean, there's several in my neighborhood. They don't have to, you can design them to be however you want them to be. Pretty cool. So I just wanted to cover 2 local gardening awards. We're nearing the end here. But in Everett, there's the Monte Cristo Green Gardening Award. Cascade Award is in Lake Stevens, again for lake-friendly gardening because we're trying to protect the water there. Malik Terrace has the Evergreen Award for sustainable gardening. So if you know of others, by all means, let us know. It's interesting if it's kind of like, what is your motivation for having a garden? Is it to eat? Is it to look at pretty flowers? Do you want an award? I'll admit I wanted the Monte Cristo. We got it, but it's kind of like, however it helps, you know, to move from grass to lawn to something else, we're here to support that. And so these are just some of the things that you can achieve once you've changed up your gardening. And then some of you may have remembered that our plant sale this year, well, the last 2 years have been quite something. In 2019, we had the snow that hit in February, which postponed us from one weekend to another. And then this year, 2020, of course, we've had COVID-19. So we changed it to a pre-order only pickup sale. We love to have you there. We really do, because we have a lot of vendors and partners and nonprofits like WC Forestry and Master Gardeners and Bats Northwest and all these wonderful agencies that come. But unfortunately, we cannot gather. So rather than plan an event that cannot happen, we're going to do again a pre-order only sale for 2021. It will be at the end of February, so pre-orders will open in January. So if you really are hearing it here first, this is just determined. It will be at the fairgrounds as it's been in the past. But anything to add to that, Sarah?
Not that I can recall.
Yeah. Anyway, there's always a wonderful list of plants. Elisa is, when she came on as the manager of the plant sale this last year, she added in new plants that we hadn't had before. So you just never know what might be on the list. We're always going to have the basics, your maples and your snowberries and salmon berries and flowering currant and western trillium. Everyone loves those. But the main thing with the pre-order sale too is that eventually we will run out of stock. So just be prepared for that too, that if you really have your heart set on a particular plant, order early. But that will be coming soon. We also do Orca Recovery Day, and just a reminder of that, again, it's a COVID-affected thing for 2020. Normally we'd be doing some sort of planting or volunteer event somewhere, but in this case, we're just going to be asking, what are you doing on this day or every day for the orcas? Because it's not like we just want you to have a lovely garden for you. It does make an impact. All of this stuff makes an impact, larger like ripples on water, to get to other bigger creatures in our environment, including us, but orcas as well. So Orca Recovery Day will be on the 17th of October this year, or Orcatober, yeah. And just pay attention. We'll have maybe some scavenger hunt or some fun things to do as well. So with that, who has questions? Any more questions? Feel free to write them in the chat or also in the Q&A.
Yeah, and I also just really want to hone in on when you're thinking or planning or adding or starting from scratch, native plants, any sort of gardening. What you really want to pay attention to is how much sunlight, how is your soil moisture? Is it dry? Is it kind of moist? Is it pretty wet? And then really thinking about the plants that you're installing on your property and kind of figure out, like, when do they bloom? You want to really be holistic about blooming times on your property, because you want to enjoy it yourself, but you also want to offer wildlife opportunities to enjoy your yard year-round as well and provide them with lots of resources. And just becoming familiar with microclimates, you know, even if you have like this rock or areas where it's a little shadier and cooler, take advantage of those areas and really like diversify your yard space.
Cool. Someone mentioned that they were looking forward to getting the pollinator pack. What's that, Sarah?
Yeah, that pollinator packet is a great one. It's those seeds you saw the California quail eating earlier, and just a really bushy, lively, herbaceous garden. There's some grasses in there, lots of native wildflowers. Some are annual and some are pre-annuals. And I did not get the whole suite of species in the pollinator pack to establish in my garden, and this is my first year doing it, so I'm interested what comes back next year or what also will be coming up again, and what's going to be new, if anything, and that could be attributed to the pollinator pack or just different birds as well, because birds are a huge transporter of seeds and everything else.
Oh my goodness, yes. We call them volunteers. Sometimes it's the plant spreading, sometimes it's a creature that is spread, and it's like, I didn't plant you here. So who did that? There's another question that came in about, will we have the recording of this presentation available? Yes, we will. It will be available on Facebook because we've done the live stream there, but also we'll be posting it to our YouTube page. So that means it'll also make it onto our website. So great question. Any other insights, any other questions, feel free to type them in, and then anything else you can think of, Sarah. I know I just in kind of a closing sort of space, this is very much, you know, this isn't the end all be all. And we love our native plants. I have to laugh because my dad came over right before we started doing this. So of course we're wearing our masks, but you know, he's a gardener too. And I think that part of the joy of this is maybe passing it between family members and within your family. There's plenty of the things that we mentioned today that can be easily handled with kids, that they can grow their favorite vegetable or their favorite flower, and you can start that inside, or it's a project for the whole family. So making sure that you think about that as you garden, like this can be a family affair, and how wonderful it is to have dirty fingers from working in the garden. It's actually good for your mental health. So any other thoughts from you, Sarah?
I really liked your input about having kids join too. I had my son pick a couple plants to put in the pollinator garden, and he's always interested, like, where's the plant I planted? I want to see what it looks like. What does the flower look like? And just getting them more involved, and especially when it comes to growing food, because we live in an age now where typically all of us go to the grocery store and buy our food there, and kids don't have that connection with what does it look like when it's growing? What does the leaves look like? What does the actual plant look like? What part of the plant am I eating? Am I eating the root, like a carrot, or is this like a crazy flower, fruit? I just really loving getting kids involved because it just creates more awareness, and that's just kind of what we need in our society now. It's just more awareness.
I agree with that. Yeah. Well, okay, if there aren't any other questions, we will wrap up. We really are thankful that you could join us today. And if a noontime session is better than evening, please let us know that too. We're trying to find times when we can be with you or be together in ways that we can share information. And of course, we could take any of these topics and turn them into an hour-long presentation about just rain gardens, because there's way more there too, or any of the growing foods. So let us know if there's other topics you'd like to know more about, and we're happy to do that. Just another one to point to, next week we have one on Tuesday on tied to Camino, but loosely it's about sustainable earth-friendly gardening and landscapes. So take a look on our website and Facebook page for that and sign up. And I think with that, we'll say thank you. And I see a noon is good. Okay. Well, it's good to know because it helps us to plan and make sure that people will be available, because your questions help us too. So yeah, that's great. All right. Well, with all of that, then I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you, Sarah. This has been really fun.
Thank you everyone for joining us.
Yes. Have a great day. Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.